Hello! So today we are going to take a look at some beautiful vintage Lexicon effects. Let's start with a bit of history. The origins of Lexicon goes back to the late 60s when Dr. Francis Lee and Chuck Bagnashi established a company in Waltham, Massachusetts called Data Sciences to build medical equipment. One of the units they designed was a heartbeat monitor that used a digital delay line. After some experiments, they realised there was potential for audio application with this delay, and a deal with distributor Gotham Audio saw the launch of their first effects product, the Gotham 101 in 1971, which was amongst the earliest digital delays on the market. This was then redesigned and improved, and the Delta T series followed with the models 101 and 102 that sported, for the first time, the Lexicon brand. These units were used by artists such as Led Zeppelin, Michael Jackson and Prince. Dr. David Griesinger subsequently joined Lexicon, and he designed the legendary Model 224 digital reverb in 1978, which is one of the most famous reverbs of all time, and as well as being used by countless artists on countless hit records, is best known as Vangelis' weapon of choice, and the unit responsible for the epic ambience heard throughout the Blade Runner soundtrack. 1978 also saw the launch of a new delay called the Model 93, which was the first of the Primetime series. This too found its way onto hit recordings and, along with the 224, became an ingredient in Brian Eno's Shimmer reverb, which we'll look at later. Into the 80s, Lexicon started making more affordable units such as the popular PCM series, but also continued producing their flagship 200 series reverbs and primetime delays, and the two units we're looking at in this video come from 1983 and 1984 respectively. Notably, later in the decade, Lexicon launched the first ever hard disk recording system, the Opus. Lexicon was then acquired by Harman in 1993, and they continue to produce products to this very day. And back in 2014, Lexicon was awarded a technical Grammy for contributions of outstanding technical significance to the recording field. So let's start with the Super Primetime, and the best way to demonstrate what it sounds like and explain how it works is to do a series of experiments that start really simple and then get progressively more complex. Okay, experiment 1, the vanilla delay. We've got the Roland Super JD running directly into the input, and then we're taking the output back into my audio interface. So we turn it up on the way in, and then we turn it up on the way out. Got this pretty little ditty going on here. So the next thing we can do is turn up one of the two delay lines. So let's go with A. And then we set the delay time in milliseconds here. You can go all the way up to over a second, I think. 1.3, which is quite a lot for the early 80s. So let's find about there. That's sort of a 16th delay. And then you can bring in some recirculation of the delay, which is your classic feedback, and you can filter that as well if you want. There's a low pass filter that doesn't apply to the input signal, just to the recirculation. And then we can bring in the other delay line as well. Quite nice. Recirculate that as well. Oh, a bit too much. Bit more subtle on the second one. And there we go. A pretty little vanilla delay. Sounds really lovely, doesn't it? So experiment 2, we've got the JD990 again coming in and out. And then we're going to turn up delay line A and set a very short delay time. Start about there. And as I've explained on this channel before, if you delay a signal, then mix it back in with itself. When the delay is very short, you'll get comb filtering. Let's add some recirculation. So if we now modulate the delay time with an LFO, we get flanging. You can play with the flavour of flanging by playing them with the initial delay time. The speed of it as well. You can bring in another one. So there's lots of different flavours of flanging you can get using the Lexicon Super Primetime. So experiment 3, all the way from the south of France, this is Ambience. So let's set the KR55 running. That's going into the input mixer, and I'm taking the direct out of the input mixer, so the output mixer is doing diddly squat. I'm then taking the direct outputs of the two delay lines A and B, which you do on the back. And now let's increase the delay time. If you're listening in headphones, you'll really notice this. The glitching, by the way, is what happens when you change the time on the machine. Once it's set, it stops glitching. The nature of the technology of the time. And now we're going to bring in a little bit of modulation, subtle, not crazy, from a slow LFO. And we're going to feed back a bit of the delay lines into the input. Then we're going to turn on the VCA. That does a number of things, but one of the things it does is help tackle the feedback so it doesn't get, run away and go mental. Could play around with that a little bit more. Something like that, and you get that classic 80s automatic double tracking sound. They used it on vocals loads, but they used it on drums as well, think Genesis, and this went back to the sort of Eventide harmonizer days, and in fact back to the earliest Primetime as well, but they were certainly using it in the 80s, and it sounds lovely. So for the final experiment, let's get around the back. We can bring in an auxiliary signal with our main signal. We can take various signal outputs. We can modulate and also freeze and unfreeze the delay lines, and you can even step through the registers if you want. Those are the presets, because this actually has 32 memory slots on it. So let's see what happens. So you can hear that it can sound sort of very middle of the road all the way to really peculiar and quite contemporary, and ironically that's probably because it's vintage, because when you push it and do the sort of delay freezes and delay line frequency modulation, it can't quite keep up and it glitches and spits and does unpredictable things, which is wonderful. We're going to move on now to the Model 200 Reverberator. And again, the way to demonstrate it is to do a series of experiments that start simple and then get more complex. So the first thing I'm going to show you is an absolutely classic 80s reverb thing, which is non-linear reverbs. That's a reverb that instead of decaying naturally sort of does the opposite and rises in amplitude before slamming shut. And this was, as the story goes, accidentally discovered by Phil Collins and co. when they had a talkback mic with a gate on it left active while they were listening to the drums, and as it blended in with the drum mics, it sounded incredible, so they used it, and then everybody loved it, and then manufacturers found ways to emulate it, and you got the nonlinear reverb algorithm in the AMS RMX16, and then basically every reverb after, and the Model 200 is no exception. It's got an inverse rooms option. So let's get an 80s drum machine running, bring up some reverb in the mix, and now what we want to do is we want to increase the reverb time but sort of keep the room size, which is measured in meters, quite low. You don't want it sort of up here too much. So quite small. And then maybe increase the pre-delay, which is the delay before the onset of the reverb. Play with the mix. We can lower the diffusion. Probably sounds better with that high. And then we could roll off and filter it. I think it sounds better with it sort of unfiltered. And if you listen to the reverb on its own, it's got this strange sort of backwards sound to it because it's inverse or non-linear. And you get that sort of classic 80s drum sound that we all know and love. An interesting thing, I was talking to the wonderful Anthony Marinelli last night, and he spotted this over my shoulder and said, the Model 200, I used to have one of those, used it on loads of productions, of course, but it was also used for sound design, and he specifically remembers using this algorithm to process the voice of James Earl Jones on the film Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night.
He wants to know what world this is.
So Vangelis is famous for using the earlier Lexicon 224. Now, the Model 200 is not dissimilar from the 224, made by the same people only a few years later, does a lot of the same sort of things. For example, you can set up a hall preset and then just max everything out and get this impossibly long reverb that sounds utterly divine. So let's set that up. I'm going to hook up my Udio Super Gemini, which has got poly aftertouch and a ribbon, much like the Yamaha CS80 that Vangelis famously used. And let's just see what it sounds like. So if you've ever wondered what God's ringtone is, I think that's probably it. Howdy do. So speaking of famous artists or artistes, a pair that did a trick with the earlier Primetime and the 224 are Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois, where they would set up pitch-shifted delays with modulation in feedback loops with the reverb and create that famous shimmer sound that we all know and love. So let's see if we can set up something not dissimilar to that using these units. Okay, so I've got some chords from my Prophet 10 going into the Super Primetime first. You've got to be really careful with the levels on this. It very quickly gets out of control with feedback loops. So first thing, we're going to bring in some delay and a bit of feedback, and I'm modulating the delays with the onboard LFO. So when it comes back in, there you go. Can you hear that? Kind of drifting nicely. A little bit of wonkiness. And then that is going into the Model 200, and I've got the rich split set up, so you can set a different reverb time on the left and right channels. So I've got a shorter reverb time on this channel. We're then going out and then into a pitch shifter, which I'll add. As you can hear, that's a Dr. Scientist BitQuest. Fantastic pedal that, by the way. And then we come out of the Dr. Scientist into the other side of the Lexicon Model 200. And on the other side, I've got a longer reverb time. So now if we bring up the output mix so that we have all reverb, you should start to hear that sort of shimmer effect. Lower the level a little bit. And we get that beautiful sort of Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois-esque sort of sound. Not exactly what they did, but it's sort of inspired by them. It's just beautiful, isn't it? So I've wanted to do a Lexicon video for ages, and I'm so grateful to the owner of these two units to be able to borrow them at the same time, because they really exemplify the Lexicon sound. It's wonderful. They're just such fantastic sounding units, and they also contextualize modern effects I own, like the Big Sky or the Microcosm, or plugins like Valhalla, because those modern developers owe a lot to the pioneers who first figured out how to do this sort of thing. And whilst, you know, modern effects go light years beyond what these can do and are fascinating in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, these are still quite alluring and quite interesting. They're also absolutely beautiful. What a wonderful design they have. So thank you again to the owner of these units. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon who keep the lights on. And thank you to you for watching.